good morning or good evening or good afternoon. So I just to introduce my project a little bit, the background story, and I'll get into some of the more empirics. I think I won't take the full 15 minutes. So this project looking at the rise of Japan and the implication to the East Asian regional order, regional hegemony, really came out a project that Alvin and I were doing. So we were looking at various levels of hegemonic transition, and in our paper, which we're working on right now, separated hegemonic transition into three different levels. The first is hegemonic system transition. The second is hegemonic structure transition, and the third is hegemonic state transition. So what we're arguing that if we look at historical examples and present day possible future examples, that when a hegemonic state or hegemonic actor, well, has been state in the past, but when a state becomes a new hegemon, it doesn't always necessarily alter the rules of the international system or rules of international order. And when we were writing, we'll kind of look at two examples in the past. And the first example was the transition from Pax Britannica to Pax Americana. And that even though there were two world wars that helped the transition or smooth the transition from a British dominant world to American dominant world, but the rules of the game were relatively similar. It was a continuation along the lines of globalization, free trade, or even liberalism, if we put it that way. And then it finally became what I guess liberal institution was called the liberal international order, which is rule-based, open, and multilateralism. And the other example we were looking at is the rise of Japan in East Asia, where it had a clean the decks kind of effect, where it was built on the ruins of the Sino-centric world, which is based on a lord vassal system or Chinese suzerainty or the Tianxia system, if you're more familiar with that kind of concept. Now, so this project, what I'm presenting today, looks specifically at the rise of Japan and whether the rise of Japan or the collapse of a Sino-centric world can offer some lessons concerning hegemonic transitions or hegemonic transitions in the future. And so before going into the empirics, the theoretical aspect of this project basically follows what Alvin and I did, is that in order to really have a change in terms of rules of the game, there needs to be an ideational shift or ideational change, which means that the rising actor or the rising power no longer shares the same understanding or no longer wants to be the same rules or no longer wants to participate in the rules that the existing hegemonic system presents. And if we use it, and if we look in a little bit into the future or presently concerning the fate of the liberal international order, there are many arguments that have been throwing around, more empirical than theoretical, is that the liberal international order will endure. Well, that's one possible, or the other alternatives that the liberal international order will not endure. And the arguments for either or is more empirically based. For example, Ackenberry argued about 10 or 5 years ago that the liberal international order will endure because it is more accommodating. That rising powers such as the BRICS countries have risen within the liberal international order, right? And second, if we're just focusing specifically on China, the liberal international order will endure because China either lacks an alternative vision or China has benefited from the system that China's rise in the past 20, 30 years was in fact a part or a product or a byproduct of the liberal international order. And for those who think that the liberal international order will not endure, or the rise of China is the advent of a new international order, is that China obviously does not share the core values of liberalism, not necessarily liberal international order, but liberalism. And also the regime type also matters, is that China is a authoritarian regime. Looking around the window, China is an authoritarian regime, whereas the United States or other core leaders of the liberal national order are liberal democracies. So there's a regime difference, and obviously with that regime difference, China becoming the new hegemon means that Chinese rules, Chinese laws will be internationalized and will affect the behaviors of other states. However, we don't think these arguments are really the crux of power transition. And so Japan is a perfect case here in the late 19th century, early 20th century, where that a rising power must have not risen from within the existing order or benefited from the existing order. And because of that, after it became the predominant or preponderant power in the region or in the world, it will want to establish rules that benefited its rise. And there are two narratives concerning the rise of Japan. And I think one civilizational narrative that Anya got into was that Japan wanted to break away from the East Asian identity. And so Japan was an earlier imitator of the Chinese civilization and the Chinese way of doing things. But during the Meiji period, against the onslaught of Western powers, Japan decided to make a different path. First, it withdrew from the Sino-centric world. And second, it fully embraced Western civilization or Western modernity. And one of the examples and one of the differences between China and Japan was that even though both China and Japan began adopting Western technology, even specifically weaponry, but the Meiji Restoration was to sustain Japan's independence, and the economic underpinning of Japan also changed, imitating the West. So Japan, and especially the economic underpinning of Western military power. And Japan acted as if the superiority of Western arms were an integral part of Western civilization. And by adopting Western military technology, Western modern technology, is to adopt Westernization or to going through Westernization. And that's something completely different from China, where they use more traditional methods or going back to traditional civilization history to solve problems of Western onslaught colonization. And that led to later industrialization and modernization, which I'll get into later. And so this civilization narrative was also about Japan's socialization into the modern world, where China socialization remains kind of an ad hoc adoption of Western technology and ideas. Japan went further in remodeling its political institution. And it was especially along the lines of Western colonial powers. And so for Japan, it was a way to show that non-Western societies were also able to get on the path of modernity. And it was about the Japanese spirit integrated with Western technology and Western institutions and Western economies during the Meiji period. And one of the more important concepts that emerged during the Meiji period was the idea of Tiyong or Tiyong. Oops. So that's a civilizational argument. And the second is a capitalistic or more materialist argument, which is that industrialization, modernization led to imperialism and war, very Marxist sounding or even Leninist sounding. So at the crux is that there were is a clash of two competing international regional orders within East Asia. China, on the one hand, tried to maintain its traditional suzerain ties with Korea, with Vietnam, and with its vassal states. Albeit China got into or adopted more Western or modern forms of domination when it tried to retain Korea from Japan. On the other hand, with the withdrawal or even outright rejection of a Sino-centric world or Tianxia system, Japan's ascent or imperialism was built on the backs and sweats of Korea, Taiwan, and Northeast China. And it was really, and in the late 1990s, no, 1900, late 1800s, 19th century, Japan was going through its first phase of capitalist development. And if we think about in a good product cycle, Wallerstein understanding of world is that Japan became a leading state. It turned South Korea, it turned Taiwan, and turned Northeast Asia turned Korea and Taiwan into its semi-periphery, and Northeast China, Southeast Asia into its periphery. And then this organization of interstate relations was vastly different from that of a Sino-centric world, which is built based on rights, based on lord vassals. And this new relations among organization among East Asian countries was capitalist driven or imperialistic driven. For example, as Japan continued along the path of industrialization, Korea and Taiwan substituted for the diminishing Japanese agriculture sector. The two countries back then, or two economies, exported rice and sugar in great amounts to the mother country. And by the mid-1930s, Japan began to export iron, steel, chemical, and electric generation industries to Korea and Taiwan, a classic core semi-periphery, and the periphery Northeast China began to supply Korea and Taiwan with rice and millets. Whereas China's tributary relations is more set of trade relations. But during the late 19th century, before the rise of Japanese industrialism or rise of Japanese capitalist imperialism, Japan had already offered Grey Lord diplomacy, Taikun Gaiko, to counter against China's tributary system. So in a sense, in the late 19th century, is a clash between the old tributary system and Japan's artificial division of labor, or not artificial division of labor. As Japan rise through or emerge through that artificial division of labor, it did not benefit from a tributary system. It was withdrawn from the tributary system. It was not part of the tributary system. And therefore, after Japan became the hegemon of East Asia, it automatically, or in a past-dependent way, installed a capitalist imperialistic order in East Asia. And lessons for today, and going through that historical case, and lessons for today, and what I'm hinting or even suggesting is that China's rise may not alter outright completely the liberal international order, because China in the past 30 years benefited from the liberal international order. It rise through the liberal international order, and China tried even today gain more leverage and more speaking power within the liberal international order. And if we use a term that John used, looking at structure and relation power, and we focus on structural power, well, China is not trying to overthrow the liberal international order. Instead, China is trying to gain more structural power within the liberal international order. And to use the other side of the coin, relational power, even China is trying to gain more power vis-a-vis the United States, so it can dominate the liberal international order without toppling it. And I think that for the near future is the direction of hegemonic transition and world and international order. We may be seeing a or maybe seeing a period of transition where we think that multiple powers in the face of a rising China trying to hold together a liberal international order. But at the end of the day, I think the world's tilting towards a unipolar world where we have one hegemon sitting on top. And with the decline of the US hegemon, next likely candidate is China. However, with China on top, I don't think we're going to witness the end of the liberal international order. Of that, this is the end of my presentation.